So Harluxsh, I'm excited to welcome you and just really incredibly interested in the background of your story, which I know the snapshots of, but not the full story. So what we'd like to do is to give you an opportunity just to give a quick bio of yourself. Then we'll ask some fun questions. And then after that, we'll dive into the career and the company-oriented questions that I think a lot of people are here for today.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
You sound amazing.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me. As mentioned, my name's Harluxsh Gill. So I'm a management consultant with KPMG. I've been there for about 4 years. And prior to that, I had consulting experience with Accenture. And prior to that, out of undergrad, I started with RSM, which was at the time called McGladrey. So that's to say I've been a lifetime consultant. I know no other life, and I really do love it. During my time with KPMG, I also pursued and completed my MBA from University of Chicago, Booth School of Business. I live in the Chicagoland area, but I went to school out east at University of Maryland, lived in DC area for a while, and I grew up in the Midwest. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Midwestern nuances as we go forward, but really excited to participate in the conversation. Love talking all things consulting and love helping people navigate the journey, because I know it's a complex one. I feel like every year it gets more and more competitive, where I look back and say, geez, I don't even know if I would be able to get in at this point. So kudos to all of you for taking the first step and trying to get in the door.
We're so excited to have you. And I think this is going to be a great conversation if we can keep Chicago out of it. So I'm just going to start there. We need to know the answer to what is my most important question: New York versus Chicago pizza, and of course, why?
Fair enough. I think there's more nuance to this than you probably want to hear. I feel like when I go to New York and I'm going out with friends and it's late at night and we're coming home from the bars, there's nothing like a New York slice. And I feel like New York slice is more ubiquitous. It's more like you can have that anytime. But I do feel like living in the Midwest, every once in a while, when it's always the 1 or 2 times a year where people visit and they're like, I want to hear what Chicago style is all about. And I will say that those 1 or 2 times a year, it's always really enjoyable. I don't think I could do it every day, but there is a soft spot in my heart for that Chicago style. So if people are here and they want to try it, I'm not going to turn them away and say, no, you have to eat New York style. You know, that's kind of a cop-out answer, but that's my answer.
Navan called you out. He was like, that's such a consultant. That's it depends. It's got that written all over it.
Okay, so I'm going to how to interview right now, live.
I'm going to make you pick, though. I got to push back on that one. If you only get to have one, which one do you choose?
Probably New York, for sure.
Okay, we can be friends. That's good. We got that out of the way.
Good.
Yeah, no, I agree with you for all the nuance, but I think New York ultimately comes out on top for all of the situations where it wins. Great. Second question is a career that you didn't pursue, but could have, and why you didn't pursue it.
Yeah, I think I've always been really interested in film and music criticism. I don't know that that's like a career that's necessarily bustling for new people in it. It's a hard thing to navigate, but I always found myself like, I love watching movies. I love music. I'm really into hip hop music from all generations, dating back to the 80s all the way to now. I love the way that the genre has evolved. And I really enjoyed reading think pieces about it, reading like New York Times articles, Atlantic articles, Pitchfork, Ringer, whatever the case is. And I feel like in another world, that would have been a really fun thing to pursue, is to look at the academic nature of films, of music, of literature, and figure out how they're all connected. But I also think it's fun to have that as a hobby, and I don't know what it would be like as a job. And I think that's a lot of times where like an alternate career becomes that, it becomes a career, and then it's suddenly not fun anymore. So I think it's probably good as a side passion for me.
So follow-up question, do you believe the gurus that say find your passion and follow it?
Ooh, yeah, I do. And I think that means that has layers. I think that's more complicated than find your passion and make that your job. I think it's find passions that are professional passions and find passions that are personal passions, and pursue each of them and have them be equal parts of who you are. I don't think nobody likes the guy at the cocktail party that only talks about his job. So you need to be more than just that one person. And I think that's big for me, is find your passion, but make sure that those passions allow you to be multitudes of a person.
You want to be that guy at the cocktail party that people want to talk to, right?
Exactly. Have good stories.
I always said that if you wanted to open up a conversation, tell somebody that you retired when you were 30. If you want to close it down, tell them that you're an auditor. So I think you're onto something there. Good. Well, the next one is an item from your bucket list.
Yeah, an item from my bucket list. I I think I want to try skydiving. I don't know like when or why, but it feels like that's the quintessential bucket list item that you should have on there. And I think it would be a fun thing to tell my parents after the fact so they don't kill me before I go. But I think that's something that I eventually do want to try. Just the whole experience around it and be able to say that I did it. That feels pretty quintessential to that question.
Well, I love that. Okay, great. A risk taken that paid off.
Geez. So I think I have a fun one and like a serious one. I'll do the serious one first, and I think that's pursuing my MBA while I was in school. So I think that's obviously a big task to take on. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that later on, but I think that's a risk that I didn't necessarily know how it would pay off or if it would pay off, and it definitely did in different ways, but that's something going into it to say, geez, do I want to be at a big four consulting firm, working a full-time job, being a client service provider, and taking on a full course load for multiple days a week? So that was the professional, serious answer. I think a risk that paid off that is a little bit sillier is after undergrad, during undergrad, my senior year, when I was looking to get my first full-time offer, I was getting interviews throughout the process, and I got so excited at one of the interviews at the place I eventually ended up going to that once I got the email to say, hey, you have gotten an interview, I got so excited. I got there, I'm ready to go, I've studied everything. And the recruiter tells me, oh, we actually weren't expecting you. You never responded to the email. So at that point, I kind of had to be like, I'm pretty sure that I did. I wouldn't imagine that I would miss something like that. So the risk I took there was kind of just taking my shot and being like, no, I think I'm supposed to be here. Ended up getting an offer, go home and realize she was absolutely right. I got so excited by the prospect of the job that I actually never replied to the email. So if you get an offer for an interview, make sure you respond.
Okay, that's like interviewing 101, right?
I did not take that class. I should have.
Yeah, seriously. Okay, awesome. And then final question is somebody who is no longer alive, who you admire.
Yeah, I think so my grandfather on my mom's side passed away about a month or two ago. And I think in reflecting on anybody that you knew or people that you don't know, I know like in the wake of when Kobe died, a lot of people started realizing how much more he impacted their lives than you would have perceived. And you saw a lot of posts about it. And there was articles about that, like how can someone impact you that you don't know as well? For me, it was definitely my grandfather when I started realizing how much there was an outpouring of support from the larger arts community. So background to that is my grandfather was an artist in India. He'd been an artist for his entire life. He won Artist of the Year in India. He painted a portrait for Richard Nixon when he was the president. That's now in the White House. The Smithsonian wanted to do pieces on him. So all around, big deal as an artist. And I think, obviously, I knew all of that, but I think the reason I really admire him is having to navigate a career like that, living in India during the 40s onwards is not an easy thing to do. And then also being part of history in a way where you want to be a fly on the wall. That's like a saying that goes on a lot. You know, if I can be a fly on the wall in that room. And I think he's been in a lot of rooms and a lot of conversations and a lot of parts of history that I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall for. So I guess the broader story there is when there's elders in the room, make sure you listen to them, make sure you ask questions because their historical recollection is what informs what the future generations know about some big events or some things that happen. So that would definitely be my answer.
Okay, I love that. Thank you. That added so much color to who you are already. Well, I'm really excited now to dive into the broader, more career-focused conversation. We can keep the spirit of enthusiasm up, so no reason to make it boring from here on out. But we want to get to know you a little bit. And you've said that, you know, carte blanche, you're open to just complete honesty. So that's exciting for us to have that opportunity. It's easiest for me just to build the story to start from the beginning. So I'm interested in understanding, you started at the University of Maryland, and then after undergrad, your first stop was in consulting. You went to, like you said, McGladrey was what it was called then, now called RSM, in the audit, tax, and consulting space. And I don't know if you found my truth about the cocktail parties to be true,
yeah.
but I'm curious to know just a little bit about your journey. So how did you find out about it in the first place? And then you know, what were some of the things, let's call it 2 things that you gained from that experience that helped to clarify you into what you then went on to do later?
Sure. And as I answer these, I'm going to try and make it more than just my story because who cares? And I want to make sure that you guys get something bigger out of this. So for me, when I was looking out of undergrad, I was like a lot of people. I knew that I was supposed to want either banking or consulting because that's what you're supposed to want. Which fair enough. They all sounded interesting. They had the sexy words attached to them: collaboration, team dynamics, travel, client facing. These are all things that sound cool in a box, but out of undergrad, you don't know, because if you're lucky enough to get an internship, maybe that gives you a preview into what it is that you might do. But outside of that, not really. Interestingly enough, I was an internal auditor for the US government for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission during my internship. And what each of my subsequent internships taught me is that I don't want to do that thing. So sometimes that's the most valuable lesson you learn from internships experiences is like, okay, I can safely cross that off the list. So then I started looking at what I wanted to do, and consulting was big on my list because of all of those reasons that I mentioned. And RSM seemed like a good fit culturally for me at the time. And cultural fit can be very nebulous, so I'll try and break that down. It felt big enough that it had resources of a large firm, but small enough that I wouldn't be, fighting across a million different people for a million different projects. It also helps that I actually got an offer. So that's one thing that's automatically going to make your decision is I got an offer from X firm, but I didn't from Y firm. And when I got there, I think the two lessons that I learned, getting to the second part of your question, is one, it's important to know why you want to do something with a level of specificity. So to say you want to do consulting is doing a disservice to yourself, because you're going to say, oh, awesome, consulting, this sounds good, I want to do it. And then you're going to realize there's 50 billion types of consulting. The smartest type of question you can ask when someone says they do consulting is, what type of consulting do you do? Because there's multitudes, there's layers to that. So that was the first question that I kind of unpacked as I started my career, because I was doing internal auditing, which is a form of consulting. It's not mandated, but there's, Sarbanes-Oxley work. There's all these different compliance things that companies want to have done to make sure that their books are in the right place. Ultimately, not really interesting to me, didn't wake me up in the morning, but a really good introduction to the workforce and just way of learning. So that was the first thing. And I think the second thing that I learned is just based on one very specific experience that I still remember, and that's an individual who was a manager at the time asked me to do a task for them. I kind of put my head down, did it, went back to him. It was completely wrong. I completely missed the mark as to like what it was I was even supposed to do or how I comprehended it. But the thing that stuck with me is he asked me, what could I have done differently to explain this in a way that would have made sense to you? That's a really powerful question to ask, because that doesn't put the onus on me to say, hey, you messed this up. That's, hey, I've been here longer, I know more about this. There's probably a way that I could have done this that would have better prepared you to succeed. And that is at the core of consulting. I think if you guys are all interested in consulting, consulting is nothing if not making someone else's job easier. So when you ask questions like that, you're getting at a deeper understanding of someone else's perspective and how they can succeed. Consultants are hired for like a couple of different reasons, right? One is cover your butt. If I get in trouble, I'm going to point the finger at you, consultant, and say, why did you do that? And two, it's to actually execute something that you don't have the capabilities to do. And that was a really important lesson for me in having someone help teach me the capabilities to do something.
I love that. Well, you ultimately decided to move on. How did you decide, and what wisdom would you provide to other people? I think sometimes when you think about a job like that for such a long time, then it's hard to know what kind of mileposts you're looking for, essentially, when you're trying to decide whether to move on.
Yeah, I think the mental exercise, I didn't realize it at the time, but the mental exercise I was doing is I was complaining to my now wife, at the time girlfriend, about man, this work that I'm doing just doesn't really excite me, doesn't wake me up in the morning. But I got to do this one project where I got to do a holistic risk assessment. What does that even mean? It means I spoke to a bunch of people and I talked to them about what the people pain points are, why their jobs aren't the way that they're supposed to be, how they could better operationalize the work, how they could create systems in place so that people can interact better. All things that I was like, this is really interesting. There's nuance and there's a psychological dimension to it. So I was like, yes, sign me up for this. This sounds awesome. If there's a consulting like this. And it turns out there totally is. And she was at the time working at Accenture, and she's like, we do something like this at Accenture. I think this would be a great opportunity for you to be able to get involved. Why don't you take a look? So that long story short is I looked at it, and it was very much like, they describe when you learn the definition of something and you're like, that's been me my whole life, and I just didn't know there was a word to that. And that's pretty much what I found with this type of consulting, which there's a lot of different names for it: human capital consulting, change management, transformation delivery, whatever the case is. And it's all experiential consulting. How do I make a process or a thing easier for the end user? So then I jumped in and I did the whole interviewing. I went through the ringer. I had to do the case study. I had to go through multiple interviews, and I got in. And that's where I like stepped foot onto the precipice of what would become my future career, to say like, hit me with all you got. Let me try the full gambit of what this service has to offer.
Now let's push into that a little bit more, because I'm sure that there are people on the call for whom Accenture is on their A list. Amazing firm, but you said, you did all the things, but you kind of glanced over it. Can we just go back to,
Yes.
Did you reach out to somebody? Did you like what? So like, let's break it into networking, resume, interview. So walk me through just anything that you could encourage people from that process.
So let's use that framework: networking, resume, interview. So networking, I obviously the in there was my girlfriend who connected me to the right people.
Yeah.
So this is something that obviously you guys already know. Who you know is really important, and how you utilize them is really important. But beyond that, at the point when I started meeting with the individuals that my girlfriend introduced me to, I had a full understanding of things. So I guess like lesson number one, if you're taking notes, don't ask questions to people that you can Google the answer to. It's a waste of their time and it's a waste of your time. And the litmus test there is, if you're bored in the answer, I promise you that as someone who's interviewed 1 million people, I'm bored at answering it. So ask a question that would make me excited to want to answer, and ask a question that you genuinely want to have the answer to. So that was the networking piece. I learned enough about the practice. I learned enough about what I wanted to do to ask thoughtful questions, to engage in a meaningful way. Most of you probably know the airport test in consulting. If I'm stuck in an airport with you for 4 hours, am I going to drive myself crazy, or are you going to be someone that I can kick it with, have a beer with, hang out? So all of that was really important to the networking. And the more serious you take your career, the more serious people will take you. And what I mean by that is, I knew what I wanted to get out of the experience, which makes it easier for people to point me in the right direction and be able to help me. Everybody likes to be part of like someone's success story. And the more you equip them to help you, the easier it is. So that was my networking side of things, is I knew what I wanted to get out of it. I knew that I was asking questions that other people weren't. And I knew that I was following up with the right information and making sure that I was credentializing myself in the right way. So that was the networking part of it. From a resume perspective, I probably didn't do this at the time, but you should be doing this now, is if you're applying to multiple places, you should be looking at the job descriptions of those places and matching some of the words from those, or at least the way that they're talking about things, into your resume. Because I'll talk about my practice individually. If I'm getting 1,000 resumes for 4 roles, I'm going to do some precursory elimination. And what am I going to do that by? Certain majors. We don't need poli-sci majors for this particular role. Sorry, poli-sci majors, you're out. Okay, so now that takes the 1,000 down to 800. Okay, from that 800, sorry, you have a GPA below 3.2, you're out. And I'm not saying this is KPMG criteria, because it changes every year and it's always a different set of things, but this is an example. So then the 3.2 and below are out. And then you get down to 300. And you're always bringing that list down. Eventually you'll get to a part where at a lot of firms, they actually have a computer run through it and find matches to the job description. So they're saying, if I'm looking for this, how much am I actually seeing in this person's resume, versus them saying, this is my resume, I created it once, hope it works, I'm gonna shoot my shot. That's not how it works. So if you have multiple resumes, one for strategy jobs, one for management consulting jobs, one for operations jobs, that's okay. You should have that, because those are responsive to the types of jobs you're looking for and the types of careers that you're looking for. So I would say that's the resume piece that I probably didn't do, but I came in at a relatively entry level, so it didn't matter much. The stakes were pretty low. For some of you guys, it might matter a little bit more. And the third piece was, could you remind me again?
The interviewing.
The case scared me. That was like probably one of my first case for sure. And Accenture cases are hard because they're quantitative, they're qualitative. People expect you to be sharp. Like Accenture is the largest consulting firm by revenue in the world. And what that means is they see a lot of different individuals and they can have the right to be as exclusive as they need to be to get the right candidate. So what I did is I practiced obviously a bunch of different scenarios, which is fine. And you can have all of your frameworks. The important thing for you guys to know is that you need to create a story around it, and you need to make somebody comfortable with what that story looks like. So if you are saying, here is the answer to your first question, here is the answer to your second question and third question, that's probably not good enough. What's better is if you are the consultant in this interview and you are talking to the interviewer who is playing the role of, the client, you should be walking them through this in a way that's very congruous with how you might do it in an actual client environment. So an example of what that might look like is, the solution that I would propose is X, Y, and Z based on the factors that we discussed, but I want to be transparent about the fact that one thing we're not considering or a potential shortcoming of this solution is X, Y, or Z. There's no right solution. You guys know this, like case interviews are case interviews, and they really just want to make sure that you don't wet your pants while you're doing it. And in not wetting your pants, you passed half the test, and the other half is how well you articulate your information and how honest you are about the fact that this is one potential solution. There's multitude of other solutions that you might be able to go with. And here's what you're giving up. Here's the risks in play by not doing that. However, I still feel that my solution is the strongest based on the criteria of things that we've discussed.
Now we'll get to KPMG in just a minute, but just to linger on Accenture for one more question.
Sure.
One of the things that Bain always said is that they looked for people who are entrepreneurial. And then when I got there, I thought, that's not what they mean by the word entrepreneurial isn't what they think it means, or there's some other characteristic that they're looking for. And so if you could articulate in a word or a couple of words what the characteristics of a Accenture consultant are, from both going through the interview successfully and of course then working inside the firm, what's that thing, that special something that they're looking for at Accenture in particular?
I think self-motivated and autonomous. I think that Accenture, like I said, it's huge. It's a behemoth. And like a way you can kind of figure that out is everybody knows somebody that works at Accenture. It's like a degrees of separation. So if you don't know someone, your parents know someone. If your parents don't know someone, your cousin knows someone. If your cousin doesn't know someone, like somebody knows somebody that works at Accenture, right? And because of that, when you get in there, it's a very large pool to have to navigate. It's not like a small fish in a big pond. It's a small fish in the Atlantic Ocean. And the ability to work autonomously and to be able to navigate your career is something that you need to be able to do aggressively. And aggressive sounds like an abrasive word, but what I really mean is like there's not as much hand-holding as there might be at maybe a smaller firm, a boutique firm, or even a strategy firm, which is more selective with the amount of individuals that they have you start with. The starting class is a little bit smaller. So a lot of people thrive in that environment because it's saying, I need to shine, I need to do this on my own, I need to find my next project, and my power is in my network and my brand. That's a difficult thing early on if you don't have a power or a brand or don't know what you're doing, because you need to kind of figure that territory out and navigate it. But if, say, it's your second or third job and you're like, I'm a rock star consultant, Accenture is lucky to have me, and you start building a name for yourself, then everybody that's involved in that process is going to be like, you're right, this person is a rock star, and they're going to start fighting for you. So there's the yin and the yang, and there's the good side and the bad side, and you got to know what type of work experience you want out of it. It's also a very global firm, so sometimes you're working non-traditional hours because you're working on global projects. And then the other part of that is I worked on both the strategy side and the management consulting. I started out management consulting, and then I went to strategy, and I figured out, for me personally, strategy wasn't where I wanted to be, which is like, you can't say that to consultants. That's like the holy grail. You get like a MBB job, and then you like post about it everywhere, and that's the rest of your life. Which, fair enough, if you know why you want that. And I mentioned this earlier, you got to have some articulation of why you want the things that you want. And for me, I like management consulting because I like the accountability created by actually executing the work. I like the long-term relationships. I like that I could be there to see something through from beginning to end. Versus my work in strategy, I would do really 6 months worth of work within 1 month to be delivered in 2 months. So it's a lot and it's crazy. And you get to liaise with C-suite for sure. But a lot of times you have no idea what that project ends up looking like. You present exactly that, a strategy for what leaders could do, and then management consultants or that actual company comes in and does it on the back end. So I found out what I like. That's not to say that other people don't feel the exact opposite, where they're like, I don't want to get into the day-to-day, I want to do high level stuff. So that's a question that I post to everybody on the line. Which one do you want to do and why? And the better you can articulate that, the more you'll stand out in strategy interviews and in management consulting interviews.
I love that. Well, of course, now we've talked about Accenture and how great it was at Accenture versus your previous job. And then there's another turn in the story where you went off to KPMG. So again, similar question. How did you know when it was time to leave Accenture? And did you know what you wanted next? Or did you have to go on a journey to figure that out?
Yeah, so I mentioned the type of work that I wanted to do. And Accenture was my crash course. That was like my going to boot camp for a couple of years and getting roughed up to figure out like how strong I really am. So I did training, I did communications, I did change management, I did like everything under that lens. And what I found out is like Accenture was just too big for me. I could be there for 10 years and know 10% of the population. And then I started looking around and I was like, okay, if I really want to hone in on this, what is the group that I want to be part of? Why do I want to go there? What does it look like? So not to jump the gun, but a little bit about the transition from Accenture to KPMG. So then I started looking at why do I want to go somewhere else? Is there an actual reason? And it can't just be money, because that's going to catch up to you to say like, person went from one firm to one firm to one firm to another firm. They didn't get any promotions in between. Something is fishy. They're just hopping around for either a salary or because they don't fit in consulting. So think about that too before you jump ship. So for me, it was, where can I go that I can thrive a little bit more, where I got to follow the money. And what I mean by money isn't my salary, but where is the company investing their money? Because that says a lot about the leadership's priorities. The individuals I work with, do they have seats on the board, or do they have influence to the board? Because that influences the future direction of an organization. I need to know about that. And then cultural fit. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll unpack that. But KPMG ultimately had all three of those. I love my interview process. It was always high on my list out of undergrad, but it was always that like big whale that I just couldn't pull in. So then when I finally got it, I decided to focus on the change management lens of things, specifically because I like having the, like, you know, I can always pull the card of, I want to ask as many questions as I want, and I want to be able to pull things apart and put them back together in the interest of my job. And I like making I like that my job is making other people's jobs easier. When an individual wakes up, they don't think, how is the stock of my company doing? They don't care. Nobody like is excited by that. What they do care about is my job easier to do? Do I enjoy working with the people that I do? Do I have autonomy to do the type of work that I want to do? And that's a lot of what I do, is experiential type of change management consulting, where I make people's jobs easier. I make it more helpful for them to go through a difficult scenario. So then that put me at the doorsteps of KPMG.
Love that. Is there anything that gave you pause? You talked about all of this as though you're just like, yes, this is 100% the right move. But it's risky to make the move. So in hindsight, you can see that. But in the moment, were there any of those, I don't want to call them crises of faith, but something where you were kind of like, I really don't know if this is going to be the right move? I think sometimes it's helpful for people to know if that's the case as well.
Yeah, I think for me, the crisis that I had was like towards the latter half of my career at Accenture. It was just too big of a beast to navigate. I feel like I didn't really have a name for myself, because project to project there was more individuals than there was work at sometimes, and sometimes a project got staffed based on reputation of an individual that I just didn't know or didn't have the connection to. So that was a bit trepidatious and a difficult thing to navigate. And then on my like kind of second half of my time there, I was like, this just isn't a good fit for me. I don't think they're appreciating the work that I'm doing, not because I'm nothing against Accenture. I think they were looking for a different character, and I think I wasn't that character, which, all power to you. Then you guys go your separate ways and everybody is better off for it. And then when I was coming to KPMG, the issue was like, you're starting all over. And in consulting, like, your brand is very important. Who you are is very important, because in consulting, you don't sell refrigerators, you don't sell like sodas, you don't sell candles, you sell the value of the individual. And if that is truly the one thing that you sell, then you got to make sure that individual's a rock star, and you got to make sure that people know that. So to have to build up that brand from scratch was something that's a big risk that you take anytime you go to a new firm. So then I had to figure out, what does that look like? And that's kind of something that I began navigating early on in my career at KPMG.
Love it. Well, now you joined KPMG, and then you decided to take the easy route, get your MBA, and specifically at Chicago Booth. So can you tell us how you decided on Booth, and also why you got your MBA at all, assuming that you probably didn't need it even for promotion at KPMG? So what was it about the MBA that was such a compelling experience that you doubled down on what you were doing at that time?
So I was acutely aware of the fact that the type of consulting that I do can be qualitative in nature, and sometimes that can be thought of as, a potential discriminant against like future opportunities. So you can't do this role because you didn't have enough quantitative experience, which, fair enough, maybe that is the case. But I thought, if that's something that I don't want a door closed on me in the future in any potential scenario because of that, why don't I go beef up those skills? Chicago Booth is one of the most quantitatively rigorous schools in the world. And the biggest thing for me is that their part-time program, which I've joined, and their full-time program has the exact same professors and they teach the exact same classes. So it's fully integrated classroom. And I say that because it's important to note that I think there's a perception around part-time MBAs, which maybe is probably true at a lot of schools, but I had to navigate, which is, am I paying the same money for a lesser experience? Am I ultimately funding the bar tab for the full-time program, which I didn't want to do. I wanted my own bar tab of sorts. I wanted to make sure I got my experience. And to that point, I looked at Booth and I thought, wow, they're fully integrated. My classrooms are with students from the full-time program. My professors are the exact same professors. So really the only difference is the full-time students get to do activities and participate in clubs outside of class that I wouldn't have access to, but also I don't have time for that because I have a full-time job. I just got married. I'm busy in my own life. So the overlap really fit and it made sense for me. So then when I started applying and I figured out what do I want to get out of it, I knew that I wanted to bring back data and analytics and infuse it into my practice. And I think one thing that a lot of people struggle with when they're applying to schools or they're applying to anything is they have these really big pie in the sky goals of like, I want to be a thought leader and change the world, or I want to influence this industry. My goals were very specific, and I think that really helped in my application process when I went to MBA. I want to get this degree. I want to start using it in my client. I want to get promoted to manager in a year, and 1 year after graduating, I want to make director so that I can continue on my trajectory towards being a partner, whatever the case is. And I graduated from the program in August, and this doesn't always happen. So I know this is like a small scenario, but I'm exactly on pace for each of those goals, which is cool. And that doesn't always work out, but it was a really valuable experience for me because I got to beef up my skills. I got to be more quantitatively rigorous. It was a differentiator for me, and I got the value of a full-time degree while being able to pay it off while I was in school because I also had income.
Great. So about that paying off, I know that KPMG does sponsor some people to go to school, but you're saying they didn't sponsor you, but you still decided to go.
For sure. And they sponsor for certain practices that need an MBA, like strategy. Strategy would sponsor. Versus my practice would say, we actually don't need that skill set. So I don't know it would make sense for us to do that. That makes complete sense. I can't argue with that logic. I also don't know that I want to be like, yes, please pay for this. And then I want to stay here for however many years. Ultimately, I do want to stay at KPMG long-term, but I wanted to make that decision on my own. And I didn't want to go to another practice so that they could pay it off for me. So that was a decision that I made. And I know a lot of people struggle with that. And a lot of people are like lucky enough to work at a company or a practice where they're like, yeah, if you are in good standing, we'll pay for you to go do it for 2 years. And in the year between, you can intern wherever you want, as long as it's not a competitor. And then you come back. That's awesome. That's probably the dream for a lot of people. And you get the full value and the full benefit. And it's not stressful experience because you have a full-time offer locked up after you finish. So you really just get to have fun.
Love it. Well, so in the middle of this, you're promoted to manager. Now I've got 2 questions about manager. One of them is just, what did it take for you to get promoted? What differential skill did you have to add to your analytical toolkit? And then I'll ask the second one after you answer that one.
I think there's a couple. I think one is the ability to manage up. I think we call it staff at KPMG. I don't know what it's called at other firms, but like as interns, associates, senior associates, those are your staff resources. And then you move up to the management team and then the leadership team is kind of how it works. So that jump from staff to management is a big one because then you are leading projects and ostensibly you're managing a number of individuals, both on-site, offshore, you're managing the client relationships. So the skill set that individuals need to be able to see is that you can do that autonomously. You know how to escalate things and you're doing a lot more of what can I do and a lot more of what I believe we should do is X, Y, and Z, and here's why I believe we should do that. Are you in agreement? And that's a powerful thing because, like I said earlier, consulting is nothing if not making someone's job easier. So if they know that you can make the job easier for the person above them, that's one of the differentiators to get promoted to manager. And I think another is you just need to be like stone cold killer in actually doing high quality work. Like you can't have mistakes in their deliverables. If anything, they need to look differentiated because they're that much higher quality, and you need to understand how the nuances of your task relate to the bigger picture. I think when you start out in consulting, you're like happy to make it through a day because you're like, I didn't piss anybody off and I didn't get a nasty email from the client, go me. And eventually you're going to need to move from that to being like, I get what I'm doing and I feel good that I knock something off of my task list, but I also need to understand how does what I'm doing connect to the bigger, broader picture? What can I do to be preparing for something that's 3 weeks ahead that doesn't need to be done yet? And what can I take off of someone else's plate, or what risk can I escalate before it blows up in our face? Once you start to think like that, you don't need to be doing all those things, but once you start to think about one or two of those lenses, that's when people are like, yeah, we can probably throw you in the deep end and you can be a manager for a little bit.
Well, talking about managers, I'm sure you've had some good ones and some bad ones. What do you think are 3 traits of good or great managers? Sometimes it's hard to differentiate between them until you've worked with them for a little while, and 1 of poor managers. So 3 of good or great and 1 of poor.
I think the skill that I try and imbue in my projects, and the ones that I appreciate most from managers I work with, are the first thing they lead with is, what are you trying to get out of this project? Nobody's intrinsic motivations are completing the project, because the project is very specific and nuanced to whatever that is. Nobody's like, I would love it if I could implement this specific technology to the finance function, and then I would get it tattooed on myself and it would be my biggest accomplishment. What they really care about is, I would love to lead a work stream and manage a client relationship day to day. And in doing that, I would love to be able to manage finances better on this client. Cool, if that's what you want to do, then it's my job to figure out how I can build that role for you. I can't meet all of your criteria, but I can definitely try to meet some. And then it's like, I don't want to say it's transactional, but it kind of is. You do good job on my project, and then I put you in an opportunity where you get to do something that helps you progress along your career. I think you should never forget that, like, nobody's intrinsic motivation is to make your life easier or your project successful. Their motivations are their motivations. So as a good manager, it's on you to make sure that you set them up to succeed against their own goals. And you're real about that. So I think that's one thing, is just putting like performance development and growth at the forefront of every conversation. And I think the second thing, and this is why consulting is so competitive, and why all of you are super stressed about getting these offers, is that there's a billion people that want to do consulting. Everybody wants to do it. So then the ones that get in are highly successful and they're really strong caliber candidates. And as a result of that, the second thing that I think a good manager does well is make people feel like they're part of the team, as opposed to reporting up to someone. I'm not here saying like this person who works for me or my associate or my senior. No, it's like we're all one team and we're all working together. So when we're on calls, I appreciate when my director above me is like, what do you think, Harluxsh? And I definitely try and start with, if we're having a brainstorming session, ask the lowest on the totem pole what their perspective is, because they get to speak openly without being influenced with the people above them. And then they also get to feel like they're participating in something. What's the point of hiring smart people if you're going to tell them what to do? The reason we hire smart people is so they tell us what to do, right? So use their knowledge and make sure that you're taking advantage of it. So I would say those are a couple of things that managers do well. I think an example of a manager not doing well in their role is being so oriented with getting to the finish line that they forget about like the experience along the way. You should be making people feel comfortable along the way. You should be making people feel supported, both on the client side and on the consulting side. And I think sometimes people are too tunnel vision in getting something done, that they don't realize the experience would go a lot better if people were happier in what they were doing.
I love that. Well, right now we're in a moment of transformation where we're learning to do things differently. So can you talk a little bit about 2 different elements of the job search to KPMG? Because I know a lot of people may have joined today because they're interested in understanding what you did in terms of your baseline at Accenture, right? Knowing more about the job so that they can ask better questions. But other people are ready. They want to apply and they want to do it intelligently. But in the moment that we're in right now, what does that look like in networking? What does that look like in interviewing? How should they be distinctively thinking about those 2 different parts of the process?
So I think I mentioned one earlier, is like knowing the specificity of what you want to apply to, what type of role, why you want that role. And then I think it's like, if there's like a spider web and in the middle of it is the role that you want, there's like a web of people that can help you get there. And when I was applying to KPMG, I was a hawk at identifying who those people were on like LinkedIn or through a network of friends or whatever it is, and speaking to them. Because one, it credentializes you in interviews. If you're able to name drop like, oh yeah, I spoke to Ryan prior to the interview and he mentioned working with you on a project and he said one thing that he liked, blah, 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 blah. That's doing a couple of different things. One, that's showing that you did your homework. Two, it's building rapport to say, I know this person that you spoke to and they spoke to me, therefore they probably recommended me for this interview. And three, it's giving you insider information on like, here's what a project looks like for you guys. So don't just reach out to the recruiter and say like, job please. What you need to be doing is like reaching out to individuals in that practice and being realistic. Hey, I know you guys are probably slammed. Can I get 15 minutes of your time? You don't need an hour. They're not going to give you an hour. You might not even get a half hour. But if you can say, can I get 15 minutes of your time to ask you specific questions about your experience doing X, Y, or Z, that's great. It's very exhausting when I get on calls with potential recruits, people that are interested in the company, and they're asking me to lead the relation or the conversation, or they're asking me questions that I'm like, you should know this. Like, what are you asking me for? This is on our website. This is in articles. This is in thought pieces. All of this is available. So reach out to people that are in careers that you want to do. Have conversations with them, and don't just be like, can you please refer me? Can you please refer me? Eventually you'll get there, but make sure that you're being thoughtful about how you get there. And then when you start talking to recruiters and you have those conversations, you can say, I've actually spoken to these individuals in the practice and like, I had great conversations. And then the recruiter will reach out to those people and be like, is that true? Did this person reach out to you? Yeah, they were great. Definitely recommend them. That's one step closer than you would have been if you just went to the recruiter.
Well, can I just push on that a little bit? Can you give us 3 examples of great questions that you would be happy to answer in networking calls like that?
So yeah, I don't have, maybe a better way that I can answer that is, instead of giving the 3 specific questions, is like the way that I do it, the way that I think about what constitutes a good question.
Sure.
The first part is like, you are showing them that you know information or that you did research that an other individual might not have. The second is your question is specific. And the third is that your question is exciting. So for example, with KPMG, a great question, and I guess like you probably can't all ask this now because I gave this question to everyone, but like KPMG invested several $100 million in creating like a state-of-the-art training facility in Florida. And it's brand new and it's awesome and huge. And like Deloitte had one in Texas. I know Accenture has a place in Chicago that they always use that's not theirs. So this is a KPMG specific training facility. So a good question might be, hey, I heard you guys invested $600 million in this training facility, and specifically that it started around this date. Given that that's the case, I wonder what the nature of training has looked like for you guys and what you're most excited about being able to learn at that training facility moving forward. So what that's done is that has shown that you have done your research, you know something that other people don't. You put in the work, you did the Google researches, you read the articles to know you invested this much money, you created this training facility. Then you made a smart assumption. I imagine that's impacting the way that you handle training and education. Okay, yeah, that's true. And then you're asking them a question that they're probably excited about. What does that say about the future of learning, and what are you most excited about in relation to it at KPMG? Boom, there's my question, I'm excited. Oh yeah, I went to this training facility, it's awesome, there's free Starbucks, it's really pretty, it's nice weather, and then also I took this cool class on this, and then it becomes the conversation. And I think that structure is more important than identifying what the perfect question is.
I love that. We have a framework. You basically just read it out. It's called the PSP framework, positive, specific, personal. So the positive is the exciting piece. The specific is something that is detailed enough that you've done your research for. And the personal is something that can just be answered through a Google search. It's something that somebody can layer their own experience in. So nailed it on that one. And that illustration was a great one. So now if you get a lot of people reaching out to you, they can't ask that question. You just took one off the table. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, I have one more question, and then I know we're already starting to get some good questions coming through in the chat. So I want to turn it over to everyone else, but I didn't want to finish without asking this one. It's about your volunteer experience. You actually began by mentioning that you want to be the person at the cocktail party that doesn't just talk about their job. So it doesn't make sense if we spend our whole time in our conversation talking about work. So what makes you a 3-dimensional person? I know that a little bit about your volunteer experience, but what are some of your interests beyond consulting, and how does that layer into conversations or management or other things that you do to kind of keep you engaged and interested?
Sure. And I think before I start on my experience, because again, it's just one person and that's not as important as the bigger idea. The idea for me is that like, it's very easy to be defined by your career, and you become a very boring person that way and a very one-dimensional person, and it hurts in a multitude of ways. One, I mentioned the cocktail party. No one wants to talk to you because you're just like, at work, I did this, or I'm slammed at work, or, oh, work is crazy. And that's lame. And then two, a lot of you guys are eventually going to want to apply to MBA programs. And guess what? Nobody cares about someone that goes to work and comes home. Like, it's just not an interesting application. And everybody can see when you're like, oh crap, I'm applying to MBA programs. Let me volunteer, or let me start a band, or let me do something cool for the 2 months before I apply. So if you're looking at it strictly transactional, it also doesn't make sense. You got to be something bigger than your career and a 700 or 750 GMAT score in order to get into a good school. So I'll preface that as well, because sometimes people get to the point where they want to apply and they're like, I actually don't stand out. I am Joe Schmo that has a job. So I think those are both important. So then my specific example, I was always really big on volunteerism and making sure that I'm giving back to the community that I'm involved in. Religiously, I'm Sikh. Sikhism is the fifth largest religion in the world. We originated from India, and one of our key tenets is seva. Seva is called selfless service, is what that means. And that's not necessarily volunteerism, as in I will come save you, or the savior complex, or I do something once a year. It's recognizing the humanity and the humanness in everyone around you and making sure that everybody has equal opportunities. So that being the tenet of what it is we wanted to do, we started Seva for Everybody in the Metro Detroit area where I grew up. And we have basically two things that we like to focus on. One is the revitalization of the Metro Detroit community. And that includes things like feeding the homeless, making sure that if there's job insecurity, trying to help with that, making sure that we're getting clothes drives to individuals in need, especially right now during the pandemic. We just spent over $2,000, $3,000 on making sure we made small packages for students that we could hand out to them, things that they might not have to be able to work from home or to do classes from home in an effective way. And then the second part is youth mentorship, making sure that we make the next generation of individuals stronger than we are. So many minority communities don't have that. They don't have that, white male that they can be like, hey, I need your help because you look like me and I know that you identify yourself in me, help me. Like my Black and brown brothers and sisters don't have that. I certainly didn't have that growing up. So providing that opportunity to individuals that didn't have it was really important for us. We've been around about 5 years now. We just completed our 5th Thanksgiving Back, which is an event that we do every year around Thanksgiving, where we go out to the Metro Detroit community and we either provide food to the homeless communities, or this year we provided school supplies to students that need it. Really passionate about the work that I do, really enjoy doing it. Makes me feel bigger than myself. And it's something that I love talking about.
I love it. Well, then I can't end just there because it was really good. But there's one question I feel like that's looming that if it doesn't get asked in the questions, it would be silly not to ask it. But you mentioned that you want to be at KPMG for the long run. So in your 3rd season of consulting, you found the team that you want to play for a long time. Why? What is it about KPMG that people probably don't know about that makes it, especially once you're there, the kind of place that you want to do that?
I think I had leadership support, one, and then there's multiple articles that will tell you the thing that makes people happiest at work is autonomy. Don't tell me how you want something done, tell me what you want done and let me go out and do it like how I want to do it. And I think I have both here. So I have leadership support to become the leader that I want to be. I have people advocating on my behalf, which is really important. Advocacy is really important. And I think that's something we don't see enough of. So I have that advocacy, and I have sponsors. So sponsors are different than mentors. Mentors are people that you're like, yeah, I can answer your questions, I can guide you. Sponsors are people that use their position of power, their clout, to actually advocate on your career progression. Everybody can have a mentor. What you want is a sponsor to be successful in your career. And I have multiple sponsors, people that are saying, I am a partner at this firm, I've been here for 20 years, I see future success or growth in person X. That's really important, and I have that here. And then the second thing is autonomy. I don't get told how to do things. And if I have an idea for wanting to do something, I get the green light to do that. You could possibly say that comes with years of experience and building your brand and reputation, which I think it should. You shouldn't be able to do that from the jump. But I think I've done that to a point where I can do cool things that I want and ideas that I make up, so long as nobody else is doing it and so long as there's a demand for it. And I think those two things have kept me here. And I love consulting. I think it's fun. I think I would go crazy if I had to do the same job every day. And being able to manage the internal and external stuff is really cool for me. So I think that's why I'll see myself here long term.
I love it.